In our previous tutorial, we learned what the MVC pattern is. In this tutorial, we'll create a web application that implements the MVC pattern. The use case that we have is a simple login application. So we'll have a login page, and we'll ask the user to enter the user ID and the password. Once the user submits the user ID and password, we will authenticate the credentials, and if the credentials are authenticated successfully, then we show a greeting page for the user, and if the credentials are not authenticated successfully, then we redirect back to the login page. So it's a very simple use case, but this will give us an opportunity to use the MVC pattern to implement this. So let's think of the components we'll have to write for implementing this use case. So we'll need a controller, a business service, a model, and a view. So let's start with the controller. We know that the controller is actually a servlet in our case, so we will have to implement a servlet. Now, when the request for a login is initiated, the user ID and password is passed on. Now, we need a controller or a servlet to intercept this request and collect the user ID and the password. So we will have to implement a login servlet. Now, this servlet will capture the user ID and the password, and after that, it does not do the authentication itself. It has to pass this on to a business service. Remember, a waiter does not know how to cook. So the business service will be an authentication service. It's a simple Java bean, and it will have a method for authenticating the user. Now, after the business service runs its method and returns a response, that response has to be contained in some value. It could be a primitive, it could be as simple as a boolean, yes or no, or it could have more information, and it could be a separate Java class. So we will implement a model which will contain this information. That will be the authentication result. And once we have this authentication result, the controller, which is a login servlet in this case, has to direct the control to the corresponding view. Now, if the authentication result says that authentication was successful, then the controller has to direct the flow to the success message page, and if the authentication result is a failure, then the controller has to redirect to the login page. So as far as the view is concerned, we see two pages here. One is the login page, and one is the greetings page. So we will be implementing these two pages. So these are the components that we need to implement a simple login functionality as we have planned. So let's go ahead and start implementing these. So I'll start off with a new project. Right-click, new project, and I will create a dynamic web project. I'll call this the login app. Right. We'll leave this as default, so I'll generate a web.xml and finish. Okay, now Eclipse has created this project for us. So let's create these modules in the order in which a user would actually access them. So what would be the first step? The user sees the login page. So let's implement the login page first. So I'll right-click, new, and I'll create a new JSP file. I'll call this login.jsp. Default should do. I have a black template. Let me change the title to login page. Now the body will be very simple. It'll just have two text boxes, one for the username and one for the password. The submit button, of course, all these three will be inside a form tag. Call this form. I need to have an action here. I'll have action equals, let me put this as blank for now. We'll have to fill this up with our controller servlet, which will handle this login form. Now, the method, I'll specify it as post. If I do not give a method here, it will automatically default to the get method, and the get method will not do for a login form, because that would mean that whatever parameters we pass, which is the user ID and the password, will be visible in the URL. So since we are doing a login action, we need to have that secured. So we'll have a post method, and we'll submit these parameters using the post method. Okay, now inside the login forms, we need to have two text boxes. I'll call this text box user ID. I need to give this a name so that the parameter will be passed with this name to our servlet. Type equals password. This is our password text box. If we add a type equals password, then HTML will actually, the generated HTML will actually have a password text box, and it will hide the entries. Name equals password, and these are our two text boxes. I'll also have a simple submit button. And this is our login page. Let's save this, and let me try running this just to make sure that it works fine. Okay, our login page is working fine. In fact, let me add caption here so that it's more user-friendly. This is much better. Now we have our login page. So we need to next create a servlet that captures these parameters, and we need to have a doPost method of that servlet, and we need to capture the user ID and the password in that doPost method. So let me create a servlet. New servlet. I'll call this class as login servlet. It will of course extend the HTTP servlet class. Now I don't need to give any description. Initialization parameters, we'll leave this as blank for now. I don't want to initialize anything. URL mappings, let me make this something more easier. Instead of login servlet, I'll just call this login. Okay, next. I don't need the constructors. I don't need a do get. I just need the do post, because in our form we are doing a post. So I'll just click that and finish. Okay, our login servlet is created, and we have a do post. Now in our do post, we need to capture these values. So first of all, these values have to be submitted to our login servlet. We know that the context, the path for the login servlet is login. So let me set this form to the action should be login, so that whatever we submit here goes to the servlet. Let's save this. Now we need to code here. Move this to do. Now what do we do? The first thing we do is get the request parameters. So I will declare two strings. Request or get parameter. The value here should be same as the name of the text box here. So this control the value of that control gets captured here. So I will use the same value. Similarly for password. Okay, now we have the user ID and the password captured here as two strings inside the doPost method. Now we need to have a business service so that this doPost method will pass this user ID and this password to that business service, and the business service will take care of authenticating and checking if this password is correct for this user ID. So let's create a business service here. The business service will just be a simple Java class. Say new class, and have the package. I'll create a new package called service, and inside that I'll create a login service and finish. Okay, now in this login service we'll implement a method called authenticate. So create a public boolean authenticate. Now this will take two string parameters. Okay, so in a typical web application, what would happen here is that this authenticate method would connect to a database where we have stored user ID and passwords of all the users of the application, and it would pull up the password for this user ID or compare the user ID and the password with what's stored in the database to make sure that the authentication is done. But in our example, we will not be implementing this because our focus is on MVC. We can have a database table and make a JDBC connection over here and validate this. But for now, just to have this method working, I'll implement a dummy method. So what I'm thinking of doing here is to check if the password is null or not. Okay, if the password is null, or if the password contains only blank spaces and no actual characters, then I will say authentication is false. It fails the authentication. But as long as the password is not null and it has some characters in it, then I will make the authentication successful. Again, this is just a dummy implementation, but it should serve our purpose of having a sample business service that we can use. So what I'll do here is I'll just compare the password to null. And if password is not equal to null, well, let me make this password equal to null. If the password is null, or if you trim the password and it ends up being a password with all spaces without any characters, then what I'll do is I'll return false. If it's not, then I'll return true. Again, this is just a dummy method that we're implementing. We are not bothered about getting this from the database, but we could do that. And if we have the database table where we have the user ID and the password, this will be the place where you would actually do the authentication. So let me save this